I had just known that that was normal, I think I would have, come to intuitive eating a much earlier time. And there could have been a lot less heartache along the way.
Welcome to the Binge Dietitian podcast. I'm Jonathan, and I'm here to help you end 24/7 food thoughts, binge eating, and actually enjoy life with food. This episode is for educational and informational purposes only, not to be substituted for medical or personalized advice. Check the link in the description for my recovery resources, and let's get straight to the episode. And today's episode, I have a special guest, Jenn Messina. And did I pronounce that right?
You got it.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, how about you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Jenn Messina. I'm a registered dietitian in North Vancouver. I'm also a mom of two. I have a 5 and a 7-year-old. And I have been a dietitian for about 15 years now. And initially, as many of us in dietetics went through a very weight-centric model of nutrition. And through my own exploration and having children, started learning more and more about intuitive eating and health at every size, probably around 5 years ago. So around that time, I decided to leave my job that I had, which was in public health. And I started my own private practice. So I got to be my own boss and help support people in a way that I think is a lot more holistic and a lot more caring for people in general.
That's really interesting. And when you started jumping to your private practice, was it mostly fueled by, the weight-centricness of, whatever hospital you worked in or community you worked in?
Part of it was, there was this what we call cognitive dissonance around what I was doing, which was weighing people, measuring them, giving them diets, telling them to lose weight, and everything that I had been learning about intuitive eating. So I came to learn about intuitive eating through an amazing podcast called Food Psych by Christy Harrison. And so once I started listening to that, I joined the weight neutral dietitians group of Canada and really started diving into the research and learned a lot more about, I was noticing a cycle in my clients and outpatients that yes, people could lose weight, but they always came back with so much guilt and shame that they had regained. And so, I knew that there was something wrong with, what I was doing because, the clients that I was working with were, they were so motivated and energetic and happy to be doing this, but then it just wasn't working in the long term. So I kind of had this realization that maybe it wasn't the people failing, maybe it was the diets failing all along.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm just curious. So, jumping just from a business aspect, when you worked previously, and then moving on to private practice, were you working on the side as you were transitioning, or did you just jump straight into full-time private practice?
I jumped straight in because I knew that like many things in life, like when we put half a foot in, we never really, it's kind of sink or swim. So I left my job. I was working as a casual dietitian and I started saying no to a lot more, kind of position, a lot more openings as they came up. And then when I started my private practice, I had 0 clients. So I actually started in 2019 and then started to build from there. And then the pandemic hit and crushed my business. People were all at home. But what happened after that, after the pandemic was that people were realizing more and more the value and importance of overall health and wellness. And also virtual platforms became more, socially, normal. So what ended up happening was initially my practice, had a lot of bumps in the beginning, but then now that online, we can see clients online, that's where it really took off. So I spent a lot of time building my business kind of from the back end during the pandemic. And then when people kind of started coming back into the world and being able to interact more, have the headspace to interact more with healthcare providers, I was all set and ready to go. So it was kind of a, sink or swim type of thing, but it's I knew that if I just tiptoed into it, I wouldn't have been able to fully commit to the amount of work. The beginning is obviously a lot of work before you really get any money at all. So the pay is 0, but I needed that to kind of kickstart me into doing all that side hustle on the back hustle to get me where I was.
Yeah. Side hustle, back hustle. Yeah.
It was going to be a side, but then it was like, if I didn't, I couldn't just have it on the side because I knew that I wouldn't do the work needed to kind of fully immerse myself in private practice.
Mm. I guess like for people who find it as a side hustle, like transitioning to private practice, they say like treat it as if it's literally your own business. It's your lifeline, but you can't really. I mean, I'm doing this as a side thing, but I can completely understand from how you feel. If it's your only, like, lack of a better word, lifeline, you'll put everything into it. You'll do everything you can. You'll try to find ways to be as lack of a better word, productive as possible, trying to like outsource stuff like that. That's really interesting. And another an interesting thing is like you found that most people came to you through lockdown, and personally I found like from other people, what my friends said, and during lockdown, that they just kept on like making banana bread, cooking, and then just like they also me like gained a little bit of weight. Because many people assume with intuitive eating, okay, if I eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, listen to my body, I'm just gonna gain more weight. How do you respond to people who are afraid of jumping into intuitive eating because of the fear of weight gain?
And so I always tell my clients that like 3 things are going to happen with intuitive eating. You're going to gain weight, you're going to lose weight, or your weight's going to stay the same. So, one of the things that I talk about is something called our genetic set point. So set point theory is basically saying that our body has a certain weight range that our body wants to be. So generally that's within about a 10 or 20 pound radius. So one of the biggest fears I get from clients is like, well, if I let myself eat, I'm just never going to stop. And I'm just going to gain 20, 30, 50, 70, 100, that their weight's going to continue to go up and up and up. But we don't actually see that in the research. So what we see is that depending on what's going on for you, whether you were, for some people, if they are binging and they're eating large volumes all at once, sometimes those are the same people that once we help normalize your eating patterns, their weight either stays the same or goes down. So some people do lose weight, I would say. Some people gain weight. It could be any of those things, but I know the fear is real. But often I say, like, yes, you may gain weight, but what do you gain from that? You gain like life experiences, you gain peace, you gain joy, you gain the ability to actually live your life without the preoccupation of food. And there's so many things that we gain from intuitive eating. And sometimes weight is gained. And I think, that's just where your body naturally wants to be, where your genetic set point is. You won't gain over and above. Like most people, I'll say like, well, we kind of want to look at your family history. Like where are your parents and where is everyone in your family around? Like if your family is, around a set weight range, that's probably where you'll end up too. And we also have seen like some interesting studies with like twins. When they feed twins, even higher than their body needs, like they might feed them like 500 calories extra. We can feed different twin groups the same amount of calories extra over and above their, prescribed amount of calories that's assumed that they need, and they will gain different amounts of weight. So our bodies don't respond to calories. It's not like everyone eats X amount of calories and everyone gains X amount of pounds. It's actually a lot to do with your genetic body and your predisposition in your body and your muscle composition. And there's we know there's over 100 factors that affect weight, and diet and activity are just a small component.
That's really interesting because it's coming from like looking at the other side. I listened to this podcast. I don't know if you know Huberman Labs. He's I think his name's Alexander Huberman, something Huberman. Basically, he is a neuroscientist, and then he was like talking about anorexia, and he said most of the time we think like anorexia is probably like 100% or 90% social, but apparently like a massive percent is mainly genetic, and then maybe just that little because you have this gene of having the dopamine response to starvation, but like starting a diet turns on that untapped gene. So it's really interesting from you, like saying it's heavily genetic, adding more evidence to it. And do you feel like when you see people with intuitive eating, who come to you for intuitive eating or like food freedom, is just explaining that enough for them to be to have this breakthrough, or do they actually have to try it for themselves?
I think many of the people that come to see me in my private practice or follow me on social media, they have dieted for most of their life. They have dieted for 5, 10, 20, 30, like decades of their life has been lost to diet culture. And they're just like, you know what? I'm not doing another diet. I'm done. Because I know that every time I do a diet, it initially works. Like we'll see, you might lose 10 pounds, but then you gain 15. And then the next diet, you lose 15, but then you gain 20. So they've slowly over time realized that, it is the dieting that our body is resistant to. Like our body wants to be within our genetic set point. And when we mess around with it, it does all sorts of things to adjust hormone levels, adjust your metabolism, adjust storage of fat, burning, all this kinds of stuff. So our body doesn't want to be outside its genetic set point. So a lot of people have just dieted for so many years that they've come to realize that like whatever they've been doing hasn't been working. So there must be another way. And that's how I kind of, in my own personal journey, many of us who are dietitians have a fraught relationship with food in our body from a young age. And that's a similar story to myself. Like as a young person, I always thought my body was too big from a very young age. And so I was always looking for this magic bullet, this magic cure to like make me lose weight and change my body shape and size. And so, that was kind of where I came at it from. And then, of course, becoming a dietitian felt like, oh, well, now I'll know the secret, right, to what it is. But the secret is that there was never anything wrong with my body. And like, I look back now at photos of myself and I feel so sad for that little girl who thought her body was wrong. But when in fact, like if I had been told that body diversity is normal and that our bodies will change and ebb and flow with puberty and with different phases of our life. If I had just known that that was normal, I think I would have, come to intuitive eating a much earlier time. And there could have been a lot less heartache along the way.
Yeah. So you mentioned that there was a moment in your, large moment in your life where you didn't have intuitive eating. Did you ever struggle with your relationship with food back then before intuitive eating?
Oh, definitely. So probably for the first, I had always thought from probably around age 8 or 9, that there was something wrong with my body, that my body was too big. And, I know people can't see me, but I am in what we would call straight size body. So I'm not in a larger body at this point, and nor had I been at that point. But my kind of family that was surrounding me was all very, very small. So everybody was very thin, very short, or if they weren't short, they were very tall and very thin. So I had like what would say like an average body size. If we looked at child growth percentiles, might be around like 70 percentile. So pretty normal. I wasn't extremely thin, but I wasn't extremely big. But I had felt that my body was too big from a very young age. And so I was constantly like, I looked at my grade 7 goals, my life goals, and one of them included make my own abs of steel video.
Wow.
Because at age 11 or 12, I already was inundated with a message that my body wasn't right, that in order to be healthy, I needed to have a 6-pack as a girl, right? And so, I mean, there's all sorts of messed up with that. But for many years of my life, I dieted, even if it wasn't a diet per se. Like I did try like Atkins and I tried calorie counting. I tried just like skipping meals. I didn't have a lot of, I didn't do any kind of diets that we generally think of that you like go to like the center or things like that. But it was definitely just a lot of like, what about if I just didn't eat lunch and had a Diet Coke, like disordered eating, things like that, where I was trying to change my shape. So, but that is probably from a very young age had thought that my body was the wrong size. So, as I got older, those messages were reinforced like over and over again. And so I was definitely deeply entrenched in the dieting mindset, even into my dietetics early career. So I think, none of us are kind of immune from diet culture. We're living in it. We're swimming in it every day. And so it's how can we relearn some of those messaging and how can we retrain our brain to think of things differently so that we can have that healthier relationship and more connected and at peace relationship with food in our body.
I'm curious. In Canada, in in university or college, when you were studying dietetics, did they mention anything about intuitive eating?
No, definitely not. So there's
Oh.
no mention of intuitive eating, no mention of health at every size. No, like this was all that I'd never heard of any of this. Now I think there is changes. Like I have heard from, universities that there is some progress in that sense. And so it was very much what I learned in university was very much like science, organic chemistry, biology,
Hmm.
and basically teaching people to diet and lose weight. Like that's what I was kind of taught that everybody should basically be trying to lose weight at all times, and that was normal for most people, right? I mean, excluding eating disorders, but yeah, that was very much like the education that I got, and that was 15 years ago.
Mm. Wow. I mean, here in the UK, there was no mention. I'm not like slating other universities, but there was no mention of like intuitive eating, health at every size. It's more of like we teach you some behavior change skills on how to help people gain weight, nutrition support, or lose weight, weight management. And it didn't explain the gray areas or the deeper meanings like, oh, why is this like, if I'm not in clinic, if I'm implementing the health behavior change skills, like telling this person to have higher protein, maybe reduce this, swap this with this, and the person's not gaining weight and not losing weight, then maybe it's something wrong. Maybe this person's lying or something. Maybe the person's not implementing the skills. We have this image about that. Did you ever struggle with that when you're working clinically?
Definitely. And I think that is what we were taught. That, maybe they're not doing kind of the plan or the protocol or the, whatever it is.
By the way, just a quick break from the podcast to let you know of my free hunger regulation webinar series, which is in the link in the description of this podcast. There's also an ebook version if you're more of a reader than a watcher. This is the perfect resource I wish I had when I struggled with binge eating years ago, which is used to guide you from everything you need to know, from why we binge, what are the binge triggers, and the eating pattern to stop binge eating. Because when we've been struggling with binge eating for so long, you and your body lose touch of what normal hunger and normal fullness is. You're constantly on feast or famine mode. So head to the link in the description of this podcast for the free hunger regulation resources to have a clear game plan to tackle binge eating for good. Anyway, let's get straight back to the episode.
So I definitely experienced that. And I think, you want to be believed by your healthcare provider. So now I reflect back on that and how like some of the messaging that I provided in my early years was harmful. And I have to like own up to that. But I think now I can feel good that I spend more time listening and more time, like I often tell people like, I care less about what you eat than why. Like I'm more interested in the psychological response to food because we're in the age of information. We know what has more vitamins and minerals. We know that, but why are we reaching for certain things? Why are we eating big volumes of food? Like what is the underlying reason versus, and then also like I try to help people reflect with curiosity and compassion on these binge episodes. Like, why are we like, why did that happen? Rather than like, I'm a terrible person. I did a terrible thing. Well, I'm going to start my diet tomorrow. I'm not going to eat breakfast tomorrow because I just binged. We try and look at it from a compassionate lens. Like what happened earlier in the day that caused that binge? And how can we set you up for success the next day? Right. It's not like an all or nothing approach. It's not like we're all in with like dieting and like only eating healthy food, or we're all in for like just eating like quote unquote junk food. It's like, where can we find a place where we can integrate both of those things so that they no longer have the same power over us? And then I also do that with kids too. It's like a lot of parents think that restriction is the way to help their kid. Like, don't give them sugar because we don't want them to have too much sugar, X, Y, Z. But then many of us remember our own childhoods when we were restricted of certain things that actually drove us to want those foods and want to overeat those foods or eat those foods in secret. Right. So that's the other piece, is like recognizing why we have certain behaviors that we do. Where do they come from? What are the origin stories of it? What are our coping strategies? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was back then younger, my mom would say when I was really, really full and I couldn't finish my plate, my mom would say like, oh, come on, Jonathan, try to finish just a little bit of that sausage and rice. Think about the kids in Africa. And I would be like, oh, I'll just try my best to finish it, even though I was like so full. And then I'd be like sickly full.
And I think when we think back to that, that is teaching a child to disconnect from their internal hunger and fullness, right? So that is teaching them that they can't trust their cues. And that's the same thing. Like I always tell parents, like when they say, well meaning, they'll say like 3 more bites, but like only that child knows exactly how much they need to grow and thrive. And we need to help empower them to listen to their body. And same like as adults, we can model our own intuitive eating as well by saying things like, my body is telling me that I'm full, or, I don't have room for that, or I'm going to leave half for later. So I think, like those skills we're actually born with. Like babies are born intuitive eaters. It's that diet culture takes that from us from a very young age. And so now as adults, like we need to relearn these skills, but we were never like, people never had, MyFitnessPal like 200 years ago, and they were just fine, right? They ate enough and they survived. And, we had larger body people, we had smaller body people, but we think that now we have to control. There's so much, I feel like so much emphasis on like self-control over body trust.
Yeah. And if, let's say, I want to, or people who are listening also as well, let's say if I want to start intuitive eating, where can I start? What do I do?
I mean, I think the first thing to do is to start recognizing. So intuitive eating is 10 principles. Obviously there's books out there you can read. I like audiobooks because I find like reading a book is like very like sitting in one spot. Like it sometimes can be a lot for some people. So I think, definitely check out some resources online. Obviously the initial book is by Elise Reich and Evelyn Tribole. The first thing I would say though, which is the step 1, is reject the diet mentality. So I would start getting curious around, where is diet culture showing up for you? Like one of the first things I get my clients to do is have a look through their social media. Start taking out accounts that are like before and after, or they're like inspirational, heavy air quotes, accounts, or they basically make them feel terrible in any way. So that's like usually a very good place to start, is like, let's start surrounding your community with diverse bodies and with messaging that kind of goes against the grain. So the messaging we receive is, in order to be healthy, you have to be fit. So where can we add in other accounts that talk more about health in more of a way that health isn't your body size? Like we can't tell how healthy someone is by looking at them. So start adding in more accounts that are positive and that have these diverse bodies. And then start noticing, like even now, like I'll go to the store and I'll notice a billboard and like, oh, all of those bodies are one size, right? And so it's just like taking a step back and realizing, like, where are the messages that we are getting that our body is not right? And to be honest, body dissatisfaction is big business. So the more you feel bad about yourself, the more money you will spend on products and services to change your weight or shape. So I think the first step is just starting to notice how often these come up. Anytime an ad comes up that's like inappropriate, I definitely will, like on TikTok or on Instagram, I'll mark it as inappropriate or irrelevant, or I'll mark it as, something that I don't want to see anymore. You can obviously change your ad preferences to change that as well. So I think those are kind of my first steps for clients, is to start listening to some additional podcasts like yours, or there's lots of other great ones on intuitive eating. And then also start curating your community, your online community, to be more supportive of, thinking of your body less of as an enemy and more of on your side.
I mean, that's really interesting, especially with social media, because even as healthcare professional, or at least when I was taught, when I was a dietetic student, I would shadow some dietitian clinics, and none of them would mention anything about clearing up your social media feed or anything. And personally, like during lockdown, before lockdown actually, I used to follow like lots of bodybuilding accounts, guys with shredded 6-pack abs, boulder shoulders, stuff like that. And I was getting like, this is really exhausting. Like, and then I would get also like friends also saying, oh, like I'm gonna have a social media fast for like 3 months. I've had enough. But now I follow like intuitive eating, health at every size accounts like yours and so many others, where every time I open up my Instagram feed, I'm just like exposed to things that make me feel good, make me realize, oh, this is actually normal. Because
Mhm.
I can't remember roughly how the studies is, like at least 2 to 5 hours a day we spend time on like Instagram, and that's a gigantic portion of our day. And
Mhm.
if we're exposing ourselves to these kinds of things, then it's either good or is it just gonna like destroy your self-esteem. No matter how good of
Mhm.
Yeah, and back then, no matter how good a day I've had back in lockdown, like walking in the park or anything, I'll go home and then lie down in bed, check social media, and I'll be like, oh no. I'm looking back at these
Mhm.
pictures, like going out to the beach and everything. I'll be like, oh, I wish I looked like that. It ruined my day.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think that that's the thing is that like we don't even realize like we don't think it's influencing us, but it does, right? It has like a subliminal messaging over and over again that your body isn't good enough and that you need to change your body in order to be happier. And if you only had a different body, you would be happier. You would be X, Y, or Z. So I think we push back against that narrative that, I like to when I see diverse accounts, whether it's diverse gender identities or colors or body sizes, because that is what the world is looking like. Like that is not like it is not all thin white men and women with shredded six pack abs. Like that is not what the world looks like. And so I think when we're online and then when that's what we're seeing, I think that's unfortunately that becomes normal to us. And like obviously we haven't even touched on like the filtering and the face tuning and the apps and all that. So I mean, that aside, so yeah, I think what everyone can do and what I try to do regularly is just go through who I follow and I just scroll through it. And like, if that person, for whatever reason, makes me feel like a bad person, makes me feel bad in my body, makes me feel like a bad parent, for any reason, like I remember during lockdown too, like I remember seeing these accounts of like people reorganizing their whole house. And like, I was like just trying to like survive the day to day with my two small children. And so anyone that made me feel terrible about myself was immediately removed and at least mute them, right? You can always come back to it. And that includes like your friends or family. Like if somebody is also like sharing their weight loss journey and that's feeling really triggering for you, and it's kind of making you want to try another diet, then those are the same type of people that I would mute or remove just so that you have a bit of distance from it. And then you can kind of think more clearly as to like, what is supportive of me? What makes me feel good? Because you should be closing your app feeling good about yourself. And if you don't, there's something wrong with like the number or the people that you're following, right? We want to change that up. So
Yeah.
definitely start there.
Yeah. And Jen, since you started intuitive eating, would you mind like just sharing how different your life has been? What are your favorite things that you discovered once you started intuitive eating?
So I think the biggest difference for me is the amount of headspace I have that doesn't include food. Like I have so much more time to be present in my body and experience things. Like we went for a hike yesterday with my kids
Hmm.
to this dam. And so, walking in the woods with them, not thinking about what I ate for breakfast, worrying about what I was going to have for lunch, the calorie count on the drink, the latte that I had from the store. Like there's just so much more headspace. I think that would be my most like beneficial thing is that now I can actually be present and enjoy and have pleasure in life without constantly fixating on carbs, protein, calorie count, macros, how many steps have I taken, how much exercise do I need to do to burn that off. And I guess the other thing too would be that I feel like I can have more pleasure in food because when I want something, I allow myself to have it. So sometimes that means that ice cream sits in my freezer for like a few weeks, a month, and I can have an ice cream bar. I don't have to have 5 ice cream bars. Like that. And then when I have that ice cream bar, I try to be mindful and present in that experience. And I can enjoy food more because I'm not like thinking about deprivation tomorrow. Like tomorrow, I can still have an ice cream bar if I want one, but I don't have to finish the box today because tomorrow they're off limits. So I can just be more present in my body and enjoy food a bit more and just have that freer headspace to enjoy those pleasures of life, like going for a hike or being on vacation and not have to worry about the calories in whatever I'm eating.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And it's interesting coming from a dietitian where your whole life, well, most people think a dietitian's lives revolve around food, thinking about food, the food police, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Do you ever, when you introduce yourself, how do you introduce yourself when someone asks like, oh, what do you do as a job? Because if I tell people, oh, I'm a dietitian, like, oh, I've been good, I've had my salad today. Do you get any
Oh,
of that?
yes.
Yeah.
I tell my husband, in fact, do not call me a dietitian. I get mad at him if he introduces me as a dietitian because I'm like, because someone will inevitably have like a plate in their hand with like something on it. And they'll be like, don't look at my plate.
Oh
I'm like,
no,
I
yeah.
don't care. You know what I say? I say I help people with eating disorders. That's what I say.
Oh.
I say I work with people with disordered eating or eating disorders and help them to improve their relationship with food. And no one says anything to that. They're like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Like I love that. Because if I say I'm a dietitian, then inevitably, people think that we are here to take away your food, to take away joy and pleasure. And that's really not what we do at all. Well,
Mm.
most dietitians, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, like, basically, I heard it, I can't remember where I found this quote, but like, basically, someone said, once you start working as a dietitian, you're also an eating disorder dietitian, whether you like it or not. And some dietitians are so weight centric that they don't realize that because people wouldn't announce sometimes that, oh, I have an eating disorder.
Mhm.
Or they just keep it under the covers that they struggle with their food and everything, which is probably why they're talking about like, oh, I've been good. So,
Mhm.
and it's also, I guess for you, it's a really good way for you to like network with other people. Like, oh, did you know Jenn works with eating disorders? Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's really, really helpful. And
Mhm.
speaking of, I'm just thinking of the time at the moment, but Jenn, if people are interested in working with you, maybe just finding food freedom, the thing you talked about, like having the mental headspace, not thinking about food, guilt, shame 24/7. And yes, that is possible, by the way. Where can
Yes.
I find you?
Yeah, so definitely. So I work with clients one-to-one in the province of BC.
Mhm.
And so you can find me on social media. I'm at Jenn the Dietitian. But I'm also hopefully going to be creating a group where I have availability for people outside of BC, because obviously that's a very small group that I can work with. So that is coming soon. So stay tuned. But in the meantime, connect with me on Instagram. And I'd be happy to share more about my journey there and also, celebrate the wins, right? I think like this is tough stuff. So don't think that like if you decide you want to start intuitive eating, that you're never going to feel guilt or shame over eating, or you're never going to have body image concerns, because we are all still, the product of our upbringing. We are all still living in diet culture. But I think you can get there. And there is like all of a sudden you'll have like a day where you'll not feel guilt. You'll just eat and move on with your life and like do the other things that you want to do in your day without fixating or ruminating or beating yourself up. So it is possible. And I think there are more and more dietitians out there to help support you through that. And if I'm one of them, I would be happy and honored to be there for you.
Oh, you seem like a really, really like jolly, nice person who just listens so well. And just to like elaborate, would you explain like where's BC? It's basically Canada.
British Columbia, yeah. So we're on the
British
west
Columbia.
coast. Yes,
Okay.
we're on the west coast of Canada. So I live in Vancouver, which is
Mhm.
it's definitely near the coast. Most people probably remember it from the 2010 Olympics. But yeah, it's I'm not in the cold area of Canada. I'm in the moderate area, kind of along the border with the US.
So no like freezing hailstorm stuff like that.
Not really. I mean, we're pretty temperate here. We don't really have much snow. It's similar to like London, I would say. Like
Oh.
that's like pretty much, yeah, we have like a lot of rain. It's like sometimes a little bit warm, but not too warm. So it's pretty moderate in general. But yeah, come find me on Instagram. And then I will, like I see clients, like I said, in my province. But I will be having a program for, larger groups, because that I keep getting this question over and over again. Like, I don't live in BC, but I need some help. So definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, look out for that for people who are listening. Jenn, the dietitian. And Jenn, like, there's this final question. So, like, in this podcast, when I have a guest, I have this little tradition where the previous guest would ask a question for you. So the previous guest, she'd like to ask you, if there's one thing you could change in this world, what would it be?
I mean, I think I would wish that people spent less time hating their bodies,
Mm,
because people of all sizes, like everyone always thinks that if I get to a smaller size, I will stop hating my body. And I can tell you, I know people who are size 0 to 35, size, all the sizes. And there is just so much wasted time and energy
mm,
spent on hating our bodies. So if I could change one thing, it would be that we all felt more at peace and at home in our bodies.
that's really interesting. And this might be a pretty deep question, but do you love your body?
I'm still on the way there. I think I've come so far. I think we often want to get to body love, but I think moving from body hatred to body neutrality is a safer place for most people. I love many parts of my body, but it's so hard, like coming from I was born in the 80s, to say, do I love my body every single day the way it looks all the time? I think that's an impossible thing to say yes to. But I think I'm definitely like 1,000 times better than I was even 10 years ago in my 20s, when I, didn't have children and my body hadn't changed. But yeah, I think it's hard, right? It's a journey. And I think the other piece is to recognize that you don't have to be all the way there. Like that, I don't think, like, a journey is assuming that you will have a destination, but I don't know if the destination is for everyone loving their body every day, all the time. But it's, can we honor and respect and treat our body kindly every single day? I think that's like a more, like an easier place to get to.
Yeah. Oh, that's such an amazing answer to the question. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And Jenn, for the next guest for my podcast, what question would you like to ask for the next guest?
Maybe we'll ask them. I mean, I'm really a big fan of like getting into like, how can we cope with feelings? What would you say are some coping strategies to deal with feelings without using food?
Mm, so would it be like, like three coping strategies, or
Yeah.
just leave it
What are your
open?
top three? Yeah. What are your top 3 coping strategies that you recommend to help somebody cope with stress or loneliness or boredom or fatigue or any of these things without using food? And let's see. I mean, that's something that I ask all my clients. Like, I ask them, like, what do they do to cope with stress? Right. And a lot of them say, I eat. Right.
Mm,
And so, and that is, and not to say that you can't eat, like, that's not, we just don't want that to be your only coping strategy. So
yeah.
what can we build on that so that you have other coping strategies to help support you when you feel that compulsion to want to eat? Are there some other tools that we can use to help get you through?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. You're really gonna put this person on the spot.
I know they're going to be like sweating, right?
Yeah. Well, if you ask all of your clients about that, then it might be like a healing experience for the next guest, or like something to be mindful or insightful about. Yeah.
Definitely. And also like reflecting on their own coping, like, because we all cope in different ways, right? And so, and some of them are less healthy than others. Like, some people use alcohol or drugs or online gambling. Of course, those wouldn't be the healthiest, right? But there are other coping strategies that many of us help our clients to learn more about, whether, that be movement, or whether that be breathing, or whether that being delay tactics, or, I mean, this is kind of your area, right? How do we help people cope with those uncomfortable feelings
Hmm.
in the absence of food?
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you, Jenn, for just coming along to this podcast. And once again, for the people who are listening, check the link in the description of this podcast to find Jenn, follow her. And if you want to work one-to-one with her, then check her links out and keep an eye out for her group coaching program, which should be coming soon. Yeah, so thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Struggling with binge eating? Gain access to my exclusive self-paced binge eating freedom course found in the link in the description of this podcast. My course is everything I wish I knew when I struggled with binge eating, but it's all wrapped up into one easy to understand platform. You'll finally learn how to put an end to binge eating and put an end to food dictating everything you do, controlling your life. Access it now in the link in the description of this podcast.